As I was coming up with today's message and kind of gearing up the service for Father's Day, I came to an interesting realization. You know, Mother's Day, just last month, and I was looking for different things for Mother's Day. And there's all kinds of lovely, statements and readings and blog posts, usually by other women, about their mothers and things like that, and very inspired type of things. And for fathers, there's some of that, but not nearly as much. And what I would find, it was usually girls writing about their fathers, and guys just don't emote that way, I guess. I don't know. It's just an interesting kind of observation I had. I was trying to, try to come up with something, and like I said, I'm a typical guy, I guess, in that way, that sometimes dealing with emotions are we're not sentimental people. I have 3 brothers and a dad, and we joke we're not huggers, like our group. We just don't. It's just kind of weird. But that doesn't mean that the relationships aren't meaningful. And as I was trying to reflect how to kind of go about this sermon today, I was really wrestling with biblical examples. I feel like in the New Testament, you women, you have Mary to use. There's a lot of stories about Mary, and she's really great, and she is awesome. But I start looking at the Bible for examples of these biblical fathers. Now, we have Joseph, but there's not much about him, and I think I preached on him last year. And so I was going back to the Old Testament and all these biblical patriarchs that we have, Abraham, David. If you start reading things about them, and while they did amazing things and God called and used them, they weren't the best fathers on the planet, especially their relationships with their children, kind of sketchy. So I was really struggling and trying to figure out kind of what I was going to preach about today. And so whenever I get stuck, I have a dialogue with Amy. She's really good to bounce ideas off of. And I was really struggling. I was like, these aren't really the best examples, and I don't really want to go down that road this Sunday. I want to kind of find this example about what, where we as men find ourselves in the kind of fathers we're trying to be. And so, she would just say, well, if those guys aren't the example of a godly father, where do we find one in the Bible? So it took me a minute, and I had to do some thinking. But I remembered something. I remembered something about the opening chapter of the book of Proverbs. And I think the book of Proverbs is one of those timeless books. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today, about what it means. Is because as we all know, we're a product of modern culture, and the role of men and women is shifting. And I'm not one of those ones to bash modern culture and say we all need to go back to, wearing long pants and suit and ties, and women wear dresses to church. My wife would murder me if we did that. Culture is culture, and it changes regardless. But we have to find our role in it as it shifts. Men and women. Like I said, I'm not one of those that say that changing culture is bad. It just is. But we still have to be able to find who we are and our place in it. And one of the things that I love about this little wisdom book of Proverbs is there's a really, I think, a good passage about what it means for to be a person who follows God, and to be a man who's trying to shape his children and the people around him to be followers of God. And I really like it because most of the time if you read Proverbs, like if you jump into the later chapters of it, it looks like little, I call them fortune cookie sayings. You could put them along with the stuff you get from Chinatown, and it's very similar stuff. Do not speak a fool to his folly. Do speak a fool to his folly. Well, which is it? Well, it depends on the context. And so that's kind of what we think of when we think of wisdom. But wisdom really, if you got down to kind of brass tacks, so we always pictured as fortune cookies from Chinatown. And they make really good sayings on Facebook, little memes that we can put out there. But that isn't what wisdom is. Wisdom is quite literally the knowledge we need to live life well. It isn't just knowledge for knowledge's sake, which is kind of stinky for me because I really love trivia. I mean, that's kind of when you think of knowledge. I know all kinds of useless facts that bounce around in my head. One day it'll serve me well because I will, get in on my dream of being a contestant on Jeopardy. That's all it's good for. But knowledge that has purpose, knowledge that makes us better people, that makes us better human beings, better at relationships, that's what wisdom is. And I've often thought it was funny because the way we usually picture wise men in, like, if you read comic strips or things like that, I think it was like BC or Hagar the Horrible or one of those ones you used to read on Sundays, the little funnies. The wise man was always the bearded guy up on the mountain that you had to do a lot of work to get up there to ask this question. And he would usually answer you with a question. And I always thought that was funny that we put wisdom, it's kind of up there, away from real life. And they just kind of live up there and they would dispense this wisdom and they would stay up there away from everybody else. And I think that's really tragic to see wisdom that way. Because what we unconsciously say is that wisdom has no place in the real world where we have to get up and go to work and raise children and get along with people who we may not really like. So here in this opening chapter of Proverbs, these first 4 chapters, what we have is kind of this monologue of a father to a son. And what drew me to this whole passage was there is a repeated phrase over and over and over again. Listen, my son, to your father's instruction, and do not forsake your mother's teaching. Benjamin, does that sound familiar? What's funny is, if you watched our little exchange when we were sitting up here, he was reading the sermon title, and he immediately looked at me and said, Melville! Because that's what I call him. It's his middle name. And as he's aged, I find myself repeating it over and over again. Are you listening to me, Melville? You understand what I'm saying, Melville? Right, bud? That's the relationship we have right now. It's kind of funny. But he read the title and immediately got it. And what's funny is that throughout this passage, this phrase repeats about 10 times over an 8-chapter period. And so I kept thinking, this guy writing 2,500 years ago, it's still pretty relevant what he's saying. And so what he's doing is, it's this introduction to this whole book of Proverbs. And his whole purpose, his whole pleading is to try to get his son to live a life full of wisdom, to live life well. And as I read through these 8 chapters, and we're not going to read all the 8 chapters this morning. It is Father's Day. I know we all want to grill, so that's kind of how this works. But as I read through it, I would encourage you to go back and read it. I would alternately move between tiers of this man's plea for his son to live a wise life, to avoid evil. Almost as if he himself had went down this path and knew the pain of it and wants his son to avoid his mistakes. But then I would laugh at his tendency to repeat himself again and again and again. As your kids go, yes, I know, you've told me that 50 times before. And so as I was reading this, 2,500-year-old book on a man trying to tell his child how to live well, I began to see pieces of my own life. And maybe an example for all of us. And so, if you'll indulge me a little bit, we're going to move through a few different readings of these kind of opening chapters. And I encourage you to go back and read them all again. And I'm going to pull just these kind of different, just kind of 3 big thoughts that kind of stood out to me. Proverbs 1, starting in verse 8. Listen, my son, to your father's instruction, and do not forsake your mother's teaching. They are a garland to grace your head and a chain to adorn your neck. My son, if sinful men entice you, do not give in to them. And you can finish reading out the rest of that chapter. He implores his son to avoid falling in with the wrong crowd. Pick good friends. That's a good one. That's a good one to if you're going to, implore your children. Pick good friends. And I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with my own children about being careful who their close friends are. Now, I will say that I want my children to be compassionate and to be, kind of friends with everybody. But those that are closest to them, those that kind of make up their inner circle, this is advice for all of us. Make sure they're people who build others up and they don't tear down. People who choose to do the right thing. And what I've discovered about these conversations that we have, and that's why I like the repetitive nature of these Psalms, is they're not once and done conversations, but the kind of things that require an active dialogue, that have to go with each new stage of development. Even into adulthood, we find. We need to make sure that our peers are going in the same direction we want to go. Remember the way wisdom is supposed to work. It is something that the speaker, the person giving the wisdom, they have to live it out. That's the way we impart it to the next generation. We ourselves are people who try to pick the people who are closest to us well, so that we can show another generation, hey, this is kind of how you do it. This is the life that you live. You can't speak truth if you aren't living it. What kind of people are you surrounding yourself with? Chapter 3. My son, do not forsake or forget my teaching, but keep my commands in your heart, for they will prolong your life many years and bring you peace and prosperity. Let love and faithfulness never leave you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart. Then you will win favor and a good name in the sight of God and man. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your path straight. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and shun evil. This will bring health to your body and nourishment to your bones. Honor the Lord with your wealth and with the first fruits of all your crops. Then your barns will be filled to overflowing, and your vats will brim over with new wine. My son, do not despise the Lord's discipline, and do not resent His rebuke, because the Lord disciplines those He loves, as a father the son He delights in. Fear the Lord. Trust in the Lord. If there was one thing I could fix in church today, it would be maybe men's involvement within the church. I think nothing shapes a child's perception of God, both girls and boys, more than how a strong male role model or a father figure participates in the life of the church. This is especially true of sons. Men, here's the deal. We have to get comfortable talking to our children about spiritual things. And I know it's hard. I'm a guy. Talking about spiritual things, it's kryptonite, because we have to talk about our feelings. And no man likes to talk about his feelings. But faith and emotion are closely tied together. But if we're to raise up young people or children in faith, then we've got to talk about it. And we also have to set the example. We have to not only go, but participate in the life of the church. This father in Proverbs is instructing his son about faith and how important it is. It's important to be humble. Don't be wise in your own eyes. Don't be arrogant. Don't be cocky. Rather, look to God. Give to God. That's right. Give to God. By giving and being generous people, we teach our children that there are more important things in the world than the accumulation of wealth and stuff. We force ourselves to acknowledge that we don't earn anything. It's a gift from God. And at the end of the day, when our day is done, it returns to Him. And I know giving is hard. That's another one of those that's hard for me. I preach to myself. I'm a natural saver. I like that term better than the other word, miser. But the shoe fits, then wear it, because it's kind of me. This is one that I have to consciously do. And I want my kids to see me doing it. I want them to do it. Not because I want to be blessed materially even more, but because I need to be the one who lets go and trust that God is going to provide. Perhaps this is the most important one, this middle section, talking about having this relationship with God, this fearing the Lord. And the at the end we talks about do not despise the Lord's discipline. Man, that's a hard one. I naturally resent any type of discipline, any type of authority over me. I really struggle with that. That's my struggle with God sometimes. But at the end of the day, I have to get to the place in my life where I realize God probably has a better understanding of things than I do. And I should probably at some point begin to listen and say, well, maybe I'm not going the direction I need to go. Maybe there's some things within my own life that I need to change. This is something that I've been struggling with even in the last few weeks with myself. What are some things that I need to do that God's trying to get my attention? That He's screaming at me going, Marcus, are you listening to me? He does that a lot. He just repeat Himself a lot, just like I do. And so modeling that relationship, that lifestyle with God is important. The last one, 5:1-6. My son, pay attention to my wisdom. Turn your ear to my words of insight, that you may maintain discretion. Your lips may preserve knowledge. For the lips of the adulterous woman drip honey, and her speech is smoother than oil. But in the end she is bitter as gall, sharp as a double-edged sword. Her feet go down to death. Her steps lead straight to the grave. She gives no thought to the way of life. Her paths wander aimlessly, but she does not know it. Now, if you read this in cultural context, it's, avoid, what was the sign if you went down to the Bourbon Street in New Orleans? Beware pickpockets and loose women. That's kind of the advice here to his son. But let's pull it out of cultural context here for a minute. What is this man saying to his son? And this is not one where you could even, we like to add the gender specificity in there. But the thing is that this is advice for everybody. It's watch your relationships closely. All of us. Like I said, it would be easy to leave this in the gender-specific language and, blame women for steps that men have. But let's face it, we all can reach that point where we have trouble in our relationships. And it can look better where you think the grass is going to be greener on the other side. It would be easy to stay in that kind of specific language. But if we peel back these trappings, this is a good one for everybody. A good person knows their weaknesses and they avoid them. One of the great tragedies in our lives is this inability to live above reproach. This guy is saying, look, don't get tangled up in complicated, cheating relationships. It won't work for you. Try to maintain that integrity. And it's not easy. It's not, once you choose the path and you say you're going to go down that road, it's not easy. But the advice that he gives is that, I said, when we look at this advice that this guy has given, it's timeless. You can take it out of like I said, 2,500 years ago, this advice that this guy is speaking, and pull it forward today. And this is the same advice, the things that we need to model within our own lives. And I think if we're talking about the changing role of men in culture today, there's all kinds of fun conversations to have about that, about men's role in the home and doing dishes and changing diapers, and I'm a fan of all of it. Need to know how to do all that kind of stuff. But this is timeless. This still applies whether you live in in whatever culture you live in. These are the things that we as the church can embody, making sure that we are, and especially as men, making sure that we are instructing young people in our lives. And if you look within your own life, think about the men who influenced you and the way that they influenced you. I joke that men were not really good with emotions. I'm one of the rare men that I speak in front of people, but my wife will tell you that sometimes she gets on to me because I have a tendency to sound like Spock, from Star Trek. He's my hero, by the way, Spock. Emotions are irrelevant, Captain. And a lot of men are that way, or just that way. Men, a lot of men are, some men are, but a lot of men are. And I'm not saying that that's something that you have to be able to do to be emotive. But if you think about within your own life, those men in your life who shaped you, they don't have to be real fathers. They could be father figures. They probably didn't talk much about their feelings. Maybe they did. I don't know. But what they did is they lived quiet lives of integrity and instruction. They tried to live out that example. And that, I think, is something that any of us, wherever we find ourselves, can do. We stand and pray. Dear Heavenly Father, I love you so much. I thank you for this day and this chance to gather here and to celebrate fatherhood. And my prayer is that you would be with us as a church as we try to embody that life of integrity. God, that we would teach people above everything else to trust in you and to not lean into our own understanding. Because I know as well as probably as good as anyone else, that I suffer from first thought wrong syndrome. And that I'm quick to lean onto my own understanding and not yours. And God, may we, as we do live in a changing culture and as things become different, may we come to see those things around us as just cultural trappings, and that they don't affect who we are, and that we can dig deep and still be people of integrity and still embody that trust and show people that way. We love you. Amen. Stay standing.